She saw everyone ignore the Alpha King's mute son, until she spoke to him in sign language. The sun had barely risen over the jagged peaks surrounding the kingdom of Eldrath when the royal court stirred to life. The palace, a vast labyrinth of towers and halls carved from dark stone, glimmered faintly in the morning light, but its grandeur could not soften the chill that lingered in the air. Courtiers whispered in silk-lined corridors, plotting, laughing, or simply observing one another with wary eyes. Every gesture, every glance carried a meaning that could shift favor or bring ruin. Among them, one figure moved like a shadow within the shadows. Prince Kael, the Alpha King's only son, wandered the halls with quiet steps, his presence almost invisible. No one noticed him, or if they did, they treated him with polite indifference. He was known as the Silent Prince, not merely for his reserved demeanor, but because he had never spoken a word. Rumors swirled about why. Some said a curse had stolen his voice. Others whispered that it was punishment for some unknown sin. Kael paid no attention. Words had always felt inadequate anyway. His world was made of gestures, expressions, and the subtle language of the eyes. It was in this atmosphere of cold grandeur that Leora arrived. She came not as a noble, but as someone invited by the Alpha King himself for reasons unknown even to her. Her journey through the dark forest surrounding Eldrath had been long, and the stories of the court had done little to prepare her for what awaited. The palace was alive with a quiet menace, where shadows seemed to linger longer than they should and whispers clung to every corner. Yet, despite the weight of the court, Leora felt no fear. Instead, a fierce curiosity drew her deeper into the heart of the palace. It was during her first formal audience that she noticed him. He stood at the edge of the great hall, framed by the towering stone archways, observing the proceedings with eyes that held far more than most could see. Courtiers jostled around him, seeking the Alpha King's attention, yet no one paid the Silent Prince more than a passing glance. Leora's gaze lingered. Something in the way he watched the world, the slight tilt of his head, the careful measuring of every movement, spoke to her. It was a loneliness she recognized, not from experience but instinct. When the crowd parted for the royal announcement, she caught his eyes briefly. It was a fleeting connection, yet it sparked something she could not explain. She moved closer, letting the flow of people carry her to the shadowed corner where he lingered. "Are you?" she began, realizing immediately that words alone would not reach him. He looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and caution, as if weighing whether she was friend or threat. Then, hesitantly, she spread her hands and signed slowly. "Do you understand me?" His eyes widened, a faint tremor in his shoulders betraying surprise. Slowly, deliberately, he returned the gesture. "I understand." A thrill ran through Leora. Here was someone untouched by the shallow games of the court, someone genuine, and though he could not speak, the connection was immediate. She sank to a kneel, lowering herself to his level, and the two shared their first wordless conversation. Fingers moved in careful patterns, each gesture carrying meaning, each glance a promise of trust. Days passed, and Leora found herself seeking the prince in every corner of the palace. She learned how he spoke without sound, how his eyes mirrored the emotions he could not voice. And through him, she saw the court in a new light, not merely a place of politics and power, but a stage for the vulnerable, the overlooked, and the brave in their own quiet ways. Kael, for his part, had never allowed anyone this close. Many had tried, tutors, envoys, even family members. All had failed. They wanted obedience, respect, fear, or pity. Leora wanted none of those things. She did not flinch at his silence. She did not try to fix him. She simply listened, simply responded, simply existed in the space he had carefully carved for himself. The court, however, did not approve. Whispers began to rise, soft at first, then louder. "Who is this girl? Why does she linger with the Silent Prince?" Nobles frowned as she translated a simple gesture to answer a question, revealing the prince's thoughts to the wider world. Though her translation was precise and respectful, it was an act of rebellion to those who sought to keep him invisible. One afternoon, in the high sun of the royal gardens, she and Kael sat on the edge of a marble fountain. Water trickled between stones carved with the sigils of generations past. The prince traced patterns in the air, small, intricate signs. Leora mirrored them, learning the subtle nuances of his expression. For the first time, she noticed a small scar along his wrist, hidden beneath the sleeve of his tunic, a mark of some past injury or perhaps a careless moment of palace life. "Does it hurt?" she signed, her fingers trembling slightly. His eyes darkened with memory. He shook his head, then signed slowly, "It reminds me to be careful. To survive." There was a wisdom in that, a story buried beneath layers of silence and solitude. Leora reached out, her hand brushing against his. It was a gesture of comfort, but also one of solidarity. He did not recoil. Instead, he allowed it, a quiet acknowledgement that he was beginning to trust someone again. Yet trust in the court of Eldrath was a dangerous thing. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains and cast long shadows over the palace walls, the Alpha King summoned Leora to the throne room. She entered, uncertain, and found the king seated upon his massive ebony throne. His expression was unreadable, his eyes sharp as obsidian. "Your curiosity has drawn attention," he said, his voice low and measured. "Not all in my court appreciate your efforts." Leora bowed, but met his gaze. "I do not seek favor, your majesty. I only see what others overlook." The king studied her for a long moment, then leaned back as if testing her courage. "And you see the silent prince. He is not like others, child. He carries burdens that even I cannot lighten. Your kindness is not without consequence." Leora did not flinch. "Then let me share that burden with him, if only a little. That is all I ask." The king's lips curved faintly, almost imperceptibly, in acknowledgement. "Very well, but remember, courts remember everything, and silence often speaks louder than words." When she left the throne room, a mixture of relief and tension pressed against her chest. She returned to the gardens where Kale waited, the shadows stretching long across the marble stones. She knelt before him and signed, "He knows." His eyes flickered with relief and something more, anticipation, perhaps, or the fragile hope that someone outside his silence truly understood him. He reached out, fingertips brushing hers, and the gesture felt like a promise. Days turned into weeks, and their bond deepened. They found corners of the palace where no one ventured. The forgotten library stacked with ancient scrolls, the crumbling tower where sunlight poured through cracked windows, and the starlit terrace overlooking the mountains. Here, words were unnecessary. Fingers spoke in rhythms that hearts could understand, and eyes conveyed truths that tongues often twisted. Yet danger lurked even in these quiet spaces. The courtiers watched with envy and suspicion, noting the girl who dared speak to the prince, who dared treat him as more than a shadow. Whispers grew into schemes, small acts of sabotage, and cold glares from those who had expected to remain invisible. Leora learned quickly that even kindness could be a threat in a court built on power. One evening, as they sat by the fountain once more, Kale traced a pattern in the air, a story of sorrow, of longing, of hope. Leora mirrored his gestures, her own hands trembling as she translated silently, "I will not let them erase you. Not now, not ever." His eyes glistened, and for a moment he pressed his hand over hers, a silent vow. Yet even in that intimate moment, the air seemed to shift. Shadows from the palace corridors stretched long, as if sensing the rebellion of a silent bond. A distant laugh, sharp and cruel, reminded them that the court did not forget, and power was never idle. The next morning, a royal gathering brought new tension. Courtiers smiled politely, their eyes calculating. Leora's attention remained on the prince, who, despite his composure, showed a subtle flicker of unease. Then, in a moment that made her heart pound, she translated one of his messages aloud, a simple truth about an injustice in the court. The hall fell silent. Eyes widened, whispers rippled. Some gasped, some scowled. The silent prince had spoken, not in words, but through her. And in doing so, he had drawn the attention of everyone in Eldrath, for better or worse. As they slipped away from the hall, hand in hand, Kale glanced at Leora, his eyes filled with gratitude, fear, and something unspoken, an emotion too complex for silence alone. Leora knew then that this was only the beginning. The court, the kingdom, even the shadows themselves would not leave them unchallenged. Yet together they had begun to carve a place where truth and connection mattered more than whispers and power. And in the quiet of the palace gardens, under the long shadow of the Alpha King's towers, their story truly began. The palace of Eldrath was quieter in the mornings now, but the calm was only a fragile illusion. The court had noticed the silent prince's voice, though it had come through Leora's hands rather than his own lips. Whispers floated through the corridors like restless shadows, and every glance at the prince carried curiosity, envy, or suspicion. Yet, despite the tension, Kale remained composed, his eyes always finding Leora among the crowd. She was the only constant in a world that often treated him as if he were invisible. Leora herself felt the weight of attention. Some courtiers looked at her with admiration, others with scorn. A noblewoman had murmured sharply in the garden, "Who does she think she is?" Speaking for a prince no one notices. Leora had simply smiled, because she understood that fear and jealousy often wore the mask of polite words. What mattered most to her was the silent prince and the trust he had placed in her. One afternoon, as golden light spilled through the palace windows, Leora found Kale in the old library. Dust motes danced above shelves of scrolls and tomes that had not been touched in decades. He sat cross-legged on the floor, a faint frown creasing his forehead. He traced invisible symbols in the air, fingers moving carefully as he communicated a thought too complex for simple gestures. Leora knelt beside him, her own hands following his patterns, translating silently. "They are planning to remove me from the court." Her heart tightened. "Why?" she signed back quickly. "Because I am different, because I am quiet, because I do not obey their rules." Leora placed her hand gently over his. "Then we will prove you are more than what they see." The prince looked at her, eyes reflecting gratitude and something deeper, hope. It was a fragile, flickering flame in the darkness of court life. Their secret meetings grew in importance. The library became a sanctuary where whispered thoughts and shared gestures built trust. Kale revealed to her the weight of his silence, not just the curse that prevented him from speaking, but the burden of expectation that came with being the Alpha King's son. Though he could not voice it, his gestures conveyed the long hours of solitude, the pain of watching others rise in power while he remained unseen, and the deep longing to be understood. Leora listened, always patient, always attentive. And in return, she shared her own story, not in words but through the quiet language of presence. She showed him courage, determination, and warmth, things Kale had rarely encountered in the cold formality of the palace. Together, they created a world of understanding, unspoken yet complete. But the palace was never truly quiet. One evening, as they lingered in the garden under the pale glow of the moon, a shadow fell over them. Lord Theron, a court advisor with sharp eyes and sharper ambitions, stepped from behind a column. He had observed their growing closeness and saw opportunity in Kale's silence. "You are spending far too much time with him," Theron said smoothly, though his gaze was sharp as a blade. "Do you not realize the danger? The Alpha King does not tolerate frivolous attachments." Leora stood slowly, meeting his eyes without fear. She signed carefully, then translated for him. "We are not frivolous, we are careful, and we trust each other." Theron's smile did not reach his eyes. "Trust can be dangerous, little girl, remember that. One wrong move and you will regret it." He left as silently as he had come, leaving behind a chill that lingered in the night air. Kale's fingers trembled slightly as he signed to her, "I cannot always protect you." "Then I will protect you," she replied, her hands firm, her eyes steady. Together, days passed with careful caution. Leora noticed subtle changes in the court. Courtiers whispered more loudly, casting long looks in her direction. Gifts arrived at her door, some meant to persuade, some to threaten. She ignored them, focusing on her bond with Kale and the quiet strength they drew from each other. One day, while exploring the palace corridors that even the guards seldom used, Leora discovered an ancient mural depicting the first kings of Eldrath. The images were worn with time, but the story was clear. The family line had been touched by magic, both protective and dangerous. In the mural, a figure resembling Kale stood at the center, surrounded by symbols of a curse, chains not of iron, but of shadow and silence. She showed the mural to Kale, tracing the faded signs with her finger. His eyes darkened as he recognized the symbols. He signed slowly, "It is the curse. It was placed on my bloodline. I am not alone in this, but I am trapped." Leora's heart ached for him. "Then we find the way to break it." He looked at her, uncertainty and fear mingling in his gaze. The curse had shaped his entire life. Breaking it would not be simple, and yet her presence gave him hope, the first glimmer of a life not dictated by shadows. That night, as they sat beneath the stars on the palace terrace, Kale traced a series of gestures more complex than any before. Leora followed, her hands moving in harmony with his. Slowly, she translated, "I have never had someone understand me. Never. You see me as I am, not as they want me to be." Her fingers trembled as she signed back, "And I will not leave you. No matter what." It was a promise that carried more weight than any spoken vow. And in that promise, a new strength grew between them, a bond forged in silence, trust, and unwavering loyalty. But danger was never far. The following day, a rival noble, Lady Avira, approached the Alpha King with a calculated smile. "Your Majesty," she said, voice smooth and clear, "I fear your son's companion may be leading him into trouble. The girl is clever, yes, but cleverness can turn into rebellion." The Alpha King's eyes narrowed slightly. He had watched Leora, noted her courage, and recognized her intelligence. Yet his gaze remained calm. "Kale is my son," he said softly, "and I know the difference between trust and folly. We shall see where this path leads." Even with the king's measured words, Leora sensed the growing tension. The court would not forget their bond, nor would they allow it to exist without challenge. She redoubled her caution, but her determination only strengthened. A few days later, a test came that neither could have anticipated. The prince had received an invitation, or rather a command, from a neighboring kingdom. The envoy's message was clear: Kale must visit or risk diplomatic disgrace. It was the perfect trap, a chance to separate him from Leora and weaken the fragile trust they had built. When she told him, he signed quickly, "I cannot go alone." "Then I go with you," she replied, heart pounding. "I will not leave you." The night before their journey, they met in the old library one last time. Kale's gestures were urgent, conveying fears he had never dared to share before. He spoke of the shadows that haunted him, the pressure of expectations, and the loneliness that had shaped his life. Leora listened, hands translating each emotion into silent words of comfort. "You are not alone now," she signed firmly. "We face it together." His fingers lingered on hers, a silent vow that needed no words. And as they left the library, moving through hallways lit by flickering torches, the palace seemed to hold its breath. The court had noticed, the whispers had grown, and the shadows stretched longer than before. The journey to the neighboring kingdom would not be simple. Rumors of curses, hidden magic, and the weight of family legacy followed them like ghosts. Leora sensed the first threads of destiny weaving themselves around them, a path that would test courage, loyalty, and the bond that had grown in silence. And yet, despite the uncertainty, there was hope. A fragile, luminous hope that even in the darkest corners of the world, connection and trust could endure. As they prepared to leave Eldrath, Kale signed one final message to her: "No matter what happens, stay with me." "Always," she replied, feeling the promise echo in the very walls of the palace. And in the quiet moments before dawn, as the first light of day touched the towers of Eldrath, a whisper of destiny stirred in the air. Their story was no longer hidden in shadows. It was moving forward into the unknown, where courage, love, and the echoes of an ancient curse would collide. The road beyond Eldrath was silent in a way the palace never could be. The forest stretched like dark waves on either side, ancient trees twisted with age and shadow, their branches reaching out as though to test the travelers. Kale walked with careful, measured steps, the weight of expectation pressing on him as heavily as the curse that had silenced his voice. Leora kept pace beside him, her eyes scanning every shadow, every rustle of leaves, knowing instinctively that danger lurked even in the stillest air. Though the journey was supposed to be diplomatic, a visit to a neighboring kingdom, it became immediately clear that it was no ordinary trip. The very land seemed alive with whispers, faint murmurs in the wind that only the alert could sense. Kale's fingers moved constantly, small gestures that translated thoughts too complex for words. "The forest is watching. We are not alone." Leora nodded, responding with her own gestures. "Then we move carefully, together." The first night they camped beneath a canopy of twisted branches, a fire crackling weakly between them. Shadows danced across the forest floor, and in that flickering light, Kale revealed another secret. His hands moved quickly, signing a story she had never known. "The curse is older than I thought. My ancestors faced it, tried to break it, and failed. It binds the prince, the bloodline, the very kingdom itself." Leora traced his fingers, feeling the weight of his fear. "Then we find the way. We cannot fail like they did." His gaze met hers, dark and hesitant. "It will not be easy. The shadows are strong. They will test us." She leaned closer, resting a hand over his. "We will be stronger together." They fell silent, each lost in thought, but even in that quiet, a bond was growing that neither the forest nor the curse could sever. The next morning, the path led them to the ruins of an old castle, long abandoned, its stones blackened by time and magic. The air was thick with a strange energy, and the moment they stepped inside, a chill ran down Leora's spine. Kale's hands trembled slightly as he signed. This place remembers. The shadows are alive. They moved cautiously, light from the rising sun spilling through cracks in the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of moss and ancient stone, and whispers curled around them like smoke. Here, the prince's silence was not weakness, it was strength. Every gesture, every glance conveyed awareness, understanding, and a readiness to face what was hidden. As they explored the castle, they encountered strange symbols carved into the walls, spirals, interlocking lines, and sigils that hummed faintly with power. Kale ran his fingers over them, tracing the patterns as though reading a silent language. Leora watched closely, learning from him. "These symbols," she signed, "are part of the curse, aren't they?" He nodded, then pointed to a small alcove where the floor was cracked and uneven. Carefully, he traced a line along the cracks, then signed, "There is a test here. We must pass it or we cannot continue." Leora swallowed her fear, nodding, "Then we face it, together." The test was subtle but unnerving. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist, forming shapes that were almost human. The air felt alive with intent, pushing at their minds and hearts. Leora realized quickly that this was not just a physical challenge, it was a trial of trust, courage, and connection. As they navigated the shifting shadows, Kale signed urgently, guiding her, "Move when I move. Do not look away." They followed the rhythm of each other's movements, hands brushing, gestures synchronizing. At one point, a shadow lunged toward Leora, dark and intangible, but she did not scream. Kale's hand shot out, guiding her body aside, and the shadow passed through them without harm. It was a warning, a reminder that the forest and the ruins were alive, and their presence was not unnoticed. Hours passed, though time felt different within the ruins. Every test they faced strengthened the bond between them. Leora saw the prince not as silent, but as powerful in ways others could not perceive. He could read danger, sense intent, and communicate with precision that words could never match. And in return, she became his eyes where the shadows were too strong, his voice where gestures could not fully explain. By the time the sun dipped low, they reached the heart of the ruins, a circular chamber with a faint glow emanating from the ground. In the center was a stone pedestal, etched with symbols similar to those in the hallway. The air hummed with power. Kale approached it slowly, tracing the lines, then turned to Leora, signing, "This is the heart of the curse. We must act together. One cannot face it alone." Leora nodded, feeling her pulse quicken. "I am here, always." They placed their hands together on the pedestal, fingers entwining as the sigils began to glow brighter. A sudden wind whipped through the chamber, shadows twisting violently around them. Leora felt a strange pressure, a pull at her very mind, but she held on to Kale, focusing on the trust and understanding they had built. The shadows responded not with anger, but with recognition. Slowly, almost reluctantly, they parted, revealing a hidden staircase leading downward. The prince's hands shook slightly as he signed, "It is not finished. There is more. We must go deeper." Leora's heart pounded. "Then we go." The staircase led to an underground chamber, vast and dark, where the air itself seemed to vibrate with magic. In the center floated a faint, shadowy figure, its form shifting constantly. Kale stepped forward, courage and fear mingling in his eyes. He signed quickly, "The curse itself, it tests us. Do not falter." Leora mirrored his gestures, translating silently, "We will not falter, together." The figure moved closer, swirling around them, its voice a whisper only they could feel in their minds. Images flashed before their eyes, fear, doubt, the pain of ancestors who had tried and failed. Leora felt her knees tremble, but Kale's hand was firm in hers, steady and grounding. "We are not alone now," she signed. "No," he replied, fingers brushing hers. "We are together." The shadows recoiled slightly, then surged again. It was a battle not of swords, but of will. Each gesture, each sign, each careful connection between their hands and eyes pushed back the darkness. Slowly, the chamber seemed to respond to their courage, the air becoming lighter, warmer, until the shadow finally dissipated, leaving a soft, glowing light in its place. They sank to the floor, exhausted but victorious. Kale looked at Leora, his eyes reflecting relief, gratitude, and something unspoken. He traced a simple gesture, "Thank you for seeing me." Leora smiled, brushing her fingers against his. Always, but even in triumph, the shadow of danger lingered. As they rested, a faint whisper echoed from the walls. "The test is not over. The true challenge approaches." Their bond had grown stronger than ever, but the ruins had shown them the depths of the curse and the trials yet to come. Beyond the forest and the mountains, greater dangers awaited, forces older than the kingdom itself, secrets buried in bloodlines and choices that could shape the fate of Eldrath. As dawn approached, Leora and Kale rose, hands still entwined. They were weary, but their spirits were unbroken. Together, they had faced the first of the curse's trials and survived. And yet the echo of that final whisper lingered in their minds, a promise of challenges far beyond what they had faced in the quiet halls of the palace. The wind carried a chill that morning, sharp and unrelenting, as Leora and Kale stood on the edge of the cliff overlooking the valley below. The sky was a canvas of gray clouds, swirling with the same restless energy that had haunted Eldrath for generations. Below, the forest stretched endlessly, dark and whispering, but they did not flinch. Together they had survived the trials of the ruined castle, the tests of shadow and silence. But this, the final trial, was something neither could fully prepare for. Kale's eyes met hers. Though he could not speak, his gaze conveyed everything: fear, determination, and the fragile hope that had carried them through countless dangers. He raised his hand, brushing hers in a gesture that said, simply, "We are together." Leora nodded, replying in the same language of fingers, always. They stepped forward into the valley, where the air shimmered with an unnatural light. The curse that had haunted Kale's bloodline for centuries manifested here, not as shadow or whisper, but as a tangible presence. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the trees twisted as if alive, reaching toward them with ancient intent. "It tests our hearts now," Kale signed quickly. "Then we will show it the strength of trust," Leora answered. The source of the curse appeared gradually, a towering figure of darkness and light intertwined. Its face was obscured, but the aura carried sorrow, anger, and a longing that seemed older than the kingdom itself. Kale took a step forward, his hands trembling as he signed. "It is the ancestor who cursed us. The pain they left behind, I feel it now." Leora placed her hand over his, steadying him. "Then we carry it together. It does not define us." As they approached, the air itself thickened, pressing against their minds. Shadows stretched from the figure, reaching for them, testing their resolve. Leora felt a sharp fear, but she did not waver. She mirrored Kale's gestures, translating silently, "We are not afraid." "We are together." The figure's shadow swirled violently, and suddenly a memory appeared before them. A vision of Kale's ancestors, struggling against forces they could not control. The same curse that had silenced him had tormented them, stealing voices, trust, and hope. Leora understood the magnitude of what they faced. The curse was not just magic. It was a pattern of fear and despair passed through generations, waiting for someone to break it. "We can end this now," she signed urgently. "Are you sure?" Kale's eyes flickered with hesitation. "I am sure," she replied. "We do it together." They stepped into the heart of the figure's presence. The shadows recoiled slightly, as if surprised by their courage. Leora reached for Kale, and their hands intertwined. The moment they touched, the language of their bond, the silent trust, the understanding, the shared fear and hope, became a force in itself. The shadows quivered, the air trembled, and the figure let out a soundless cry that shook the valley. Kale signed rapidly, "It's testing us. It knows we are strong together. We must trust the bond Leora completed for him. Let it guide us." Together they began to move in rhythm with the shadows, responding to the energy around them. Every gesture they made, every synchronized movement pushed back the darkness. The curse was powerful, but it had never encountered trust and courage like theirs. Slowly, the figure's darkness began to crack, revealing light beneath, a soft, golden glow that pulsed with life. For the first time, Kale spoke, not in words but in a final gesture, a sign that encapsulated the release of centuries of pain. He pressed his hands together with hers, a union of strength and love. The shadows dissipated, the air cleared, and a sense of calm settled over the valley. Leora looked at him, breathless. "We did it. The curse, it's broken." Kale's eyes shone with emotion, the silence around him no longer a barrier but a space of profound understanding. He traced a single sign with his fingers, deliberate and soft. "Thank you for seeing me." Tears sprang to her eyes. Always, she signed back, pressing her hand to his heart. The valley seemed to exhale, the ancient magic lifting, leaving behind a light that warmed their faces. The shadows were gone, replaced with a clarity that made the world feel alive in a way it never had before. Kale's presence, once muted and distant, now radiated strength, confidence, and freedom. He was no longer defined by silence or fear, but by the bond he had built and the courage he had discovered within himself. Yet even as the curse fell away, the world outside the valley still demanded their attention. The kingdom of Eldrath awaited, its court uncertain, the Alpha King watching, and countless whispers of envy and suspicion lingering in the shadows. But Leora and Cale had changed. They had faced darkness together, and the strength of their bond was now something no court intrigue could undermine. Returning to Eldrath, they walked side by side, hands entwined, their presence commanding yet gentle. Courtiers noticed immediately. The silent prince was no longer unseen, but respected, his courage and resilience evident in every gesture. Leora moved with confidence, not as a servant or outsider, but as someone who had proven her loyalty and bravery beyond any question. The Alpha King met them in the throne room. His gaze swept over them, assessing, weighing, and finally, something like approval softened his features. "You have returned changed," he said. "The curse that has haunted my family for generations, it is broken. I see it in you." Cale stepped forward, hands folded in a gesture of respect, yet his eyes held something more, a quiet pride, a sense of self he had never known before. He signed carefully, translating with Leora's help. "The burden is lifted, but the strength remains. I am no longer afraid." The king nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "Then you have proven yourself not just as my son, but as a prince worthy of the throne." The court erupted in whispers, some awed, some envious, but none could deny the transformation. Cale's silence, once seen as weakness, was now a symbol of resilience and courage. And Leora, through patience, trust, and understanding, had become the catalyst for change, the heart that had guided him through shadow and trial. That evening, as the palace settled into a rare quiet, Cale and Leora stood on the terrace overlooking Eldrath. The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in colors that seemed impossible, shades of gold, violet, and crimson blending into a scene that felt almost otherworldly. The kingdom stretched below them, alive with possibility. Cale reached for her hand. For the first time, he spoke a single word aloud. The sound was soft, tentative, yet filled with all the weight of his journey. "Leora!" Her heart leapt, and she smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Yes," she signed back, though the sound of his voice made the gesture almost unnecessary. He laughed softly, a sound he had never known he could make. And in that laughter was relief, freedom, and the promise of everything yet to come. The story of the silent prince and the girl who saw him was no longer just theirs. It belonged to the kingdom, a legend whispered in halls, told to children as a tale of courage, trust, and the power of connection. Eldrath had changed because two souls had chosen to face darkness together, and in doing so had reshaped destiny itself. Yet even in victory, the world remained vast, full of mystery, magic, and challenges yet unseen. Leora and Cale knew this. They knew that life, like the shadows of the forest or the ancient curses of the past, would always carry trials. But together they had discovered something stronger than fear, stronger than silence, the unbreakable bond of trust, love, and understanding. And as the stars began to shine over Eldrath, casting a silver glow on the palace towers, Cale pressed his hand to hers once more. His eyes held hers, and in that gaze she saw everything he could now say, everything his voice had longed to express. Always he signed. Always she signed back, and in that single word, unspoken yet fully understood, the kingdom, the curse, and the shadow of the past were finally at peace. The silent prince had found his voice, and Leora had found the home she had always carried in her heart.